Kaishell is the continent encompassing the south pole of Kaimere. While it is beyond the known world, it is the realm beyond with the most contact with Chimerans. It is still poorly understood by most in the known world. Numerous Kaleen peoples and merchant companies from the Kadaneth Free States have infrequent trade relationships with these people of the south, the Clatten, though only the Tokaten of the southwest corner of the known world visit this realm with any regularity. Most Clatten in Kaishel reside along the coast or in large offshore islands. Like the known world, the mainland is populated by an abundant cast of strange and dangerous beasts and demons. By far the most notorious is the Moorktlot, a blind, venomous predator that has placed selective pressure on its ecosystem to be silent that extends even to its indigenous peoples. The Clatten are capable of speech, despite a reputation in the known world otherwise, that they are mute. But mainland Clatten especially have a deep religious taboo against vocalization, so as not to draw the ire of the Keepers of Silence. The words of most Kaishelan creatures are in Tokaten, a Chimeran language from the known world, as the native Clatten have minimal spoken words, and when they do speak of animals, it is usually the same word in a broad clade, and hand signals to distinguish species. Though described as such by the Clatten, the Moorktlot is not a demon. It is an animal belonging to one of Chimere's most ancient lineages, the Heterotherms. Other strange creatures, like the Fabidants, also come from the first harvests of Kaimere, and have been on Kaishel since the continent was part of the supercontinent connected to the portal. This supercontinent broke apart hundreds of millions of years ago, and has largely been isolated ever since. Only a few animals, like caribou, dogs, and the Clatten themselves, have arrived in Kaishel in the past few million years, because of the portal having no direct contact with this continent. The only animals in Kaishel either swam, flew, or were carried by boat or floating vegetation, or crossed in a few brief moments of continental contact. Among these migrants to cross when the land bridge briefly formed between eastern Kairul and Kaishel were basal sauropodomorphs. They were among the first dinosaurs to reach Kaishel. Sauropodomorphs are the group of dinosaurs that includes the iconic sauropods. Not all members of this group are sauropods, however. For a long time, these more ancient relatives were called prosauropods. As more research has been conducted and data has become available, it became clear that this is not an exclusive group. There are prosauropods closer to true sauropods than other prosauropods, so they no longer comprise a clade distinct from true sauropods. You can never leave your ancestral clade. Now, prosauropod is an informal term for sauropodomorphs that are outside the true sauropod group. In Kaimere, however, a group of prosauropods do share common ancestry and form a true distinct clade from sauropods that arrived in Kaimere in the early Jurassic. These are the Parasauropods and are thought to descend from animals like Massospondylus, though a precise ancestor is unknown. Back during the Age of Crocodiles, the Parasauropods were among the first major success stories of the dinosaurs. They not only survived through the great ice ages that ended the first Mesozoic dynasties, they thrived, being among the few megafauna to do so. With feathers and far more dedicated and sophisticated nesting and childcare compared to true sauropods, Parasauropods embraced the cold and dominated the temperate zones. Indeed, a parasauropod from Nikar during the Mesozoic dynasties called Mammoth Draco had a particularly well-preserved specimen with substantial shaggy coat of feathers to survive the ice ages between 145 and 152 million years ago. However, as the mainland warmed and new harvests blossomed, Parasauropods were increasingly outcompeted as more and more true sauropods were harvested. A lifeline was extended in the form of a land bridge connecting to Kaishell, which they not only took, they thrived. True sauropods not only are more comfortable in heat and well adapted to endure high temperatures despite their great size, their young and eggs have no cold tolerance. They won't last long below freezing. Parasauropods, on the other hand, thrive in this context. Many lineages arose and went extinct in the time between their introduction and modern times, and while there are still some in southern Kairul, the crown of Kairul, and other realms beyond the known world, Kaishell is where these near sauropods have truly shined. True sauropods have numerous anatomical traits specializing them to tremendous size that parasauropods lack. Ball and socket joints in their vertebrae promote flexibility despite tremendous size, allowing a wide feeding range. Parasauropod necks are far less flexible. They are stronger in some categories, but that's not nearly as beneficial as being able to more efficiently feed in a wider area. Their bones and bodies are still filled with air sacs, making them highly efficient to get truly massive on a light yet strong frame. Parasauropods have some pneumaticity or hollowness to their bones and invasive air sacs in their necks and torsos, but it is nowhere to the extreme as seen in sauropods, especially the lightly built clades such as the keratoderms of the known world, which have air sacs throughout and invaded to such a degree that their enormous neck vertebrae are as much as 70% air. Parasauropods are much sturdier animals. As a consequence, they cannot get nearly as large, and are generally constrained at the upper limits by the conventional terrestrial size limits, with numerous prehistoric and modern tetrapods between Kaimere and Earth all capping at around 15 to 20 tons. Sauropods, of course, erupt past this constraint. The biggest parasauropods of Kaishel, the Cordu and Tleteka, are both in this size range, though it must be said 10 to 12 tons is much more average. Most parasauropods are much smaller. The tail of parasauropods still have a strong cauda femoralis muscle powering the legs. While they lack ball and socket joints in their neck, they do possess this feature in their tails. Many hunters have noted the tail of parasauropods can be swung about and aimed with surprising force and precision. They lack osteoderms or other tail weaponry, but still strike with enough force to break human bone and even kill in larger species. In Kaishel, there are 3 clades of parasauropod, each with numerous species. The first and most basal are the so-called true prosauropods, formerly named ophthalmomimids. While many in the assembly also call the Ophthalmian thescelosaurs prosauropod mimics, to chimerans who are far more familiar with thescelosaurs having this body plan, they are the template, and these Kaishel and parasauropods are the mimics. Smallest, and by far the most abundant of these, are the mo. Mo is the Clatten spoken word for most parasauropods, and the word on its own, or simply with a pinch of the thumb and several fingers, refers to this animal. There are numerous species of mo, with the type species being the one abundant on Kaishell's Gyrehall Island. As they are very similar to other small mainland species, it is thought that they crossed to Gyrehall 1.5 million years ago, when sea levels dropped to the continent got extremely cold. As the island is over 400 miles from the mainland, such a crossing would be impossible today. Like their mainland cousins, mo live in small herds. Males often live with a few brothers or closely related members of the same sex. Females congregate in larger groups, sometimes as many as 30, although they aren't especially close to one another. As the island is well hydrated by wind and nearby warm currents, they don't have a strict mating season, though most mating occurs at the start of winter, so the eggs are laid soon after and hatch in spring. After laying, females leave their eggs in the care of males. As the males are all close relatives and most mate with all females present, there's little competition or concern of paternity. Females then disperse while males diligently guard the nests through their 3 to 4 months of incubation. Laying in the coldest months may seem counterintuitive, but their mound nests are surprisingly well insulated and warm, and this means that males are able to bulk up prior to several months of minimal feeding opportunities. Once they hatch, males closely guard and feed their young, which are helpless for their first few weeks. Because there are multiple males, they can take turns guarding and foraging. Once the chicks are a few weeks old, they can follow their caretakers. For their first few months, they are omnivores, feeding on a range of insects, eggs, and small game alongside plant matter and their parents' dung, but once they are half-grown, by the time they are 6 months old, they become fairly strict herbivores. Not long after, their fathers see them off so that they can spend a few months bulk feeding on their own to be ready for the next round of eggs. The young remain together for another year until they approach maturity by 2 years, at which point the females disperse and males typically remain together. Even with close parental care, a given year usually produces only 3 to 5 adult males that live together and form the herd for the next generation, though sometimes clutches are abundant enough that they fracture into a few groups, or, in extreme cases with particular abundance, a band of brothers and cousins might consist of as many as 12 individuals. Moe are typically around 100 kilograms as adults. Both sexes are around the same size. Moorkudlot have been hunted to extinction on Gyrehall, but there are still numerous predators they must be wary of. Most common are feral dogs that have been traded to local Clatten by the Katten. There are also 2 dromaeosaur species that pose a threat. These predators are either smaller or not much bigger than the Moe. The apex predator of the island is the flare-crest drake, a Coelophosaur. On the mainland, Kaishell, Coelophosaurs are generally quite small, but this species got large thanks to opportunity and minimal competition. Certainly large enough to take down an adult Moe. The Titan crow is also large enough to hunt adults of their own, though they tend to be wary too deep into the forests. When in a group, adults are generally safe and thrive in this relative sanctuary. The same cannot be said of their mainland cousins. Gigantomoe is a genus with numerous mainland species. They live quite like the Gyrehall Moe, but are much larger. At up to a ton, these animals can fend off small Coelophosaurs and dromaeosaurs in their environment, and the largest dromaeosaurs that approach their size can be reliably bested by a group, though of course these large dromies are reliable predators and do hunt them. Gilled-back giant Moe are considered particularly dangerous due to this species' aggression and herd defense, and are a prized kill by Clatten hunters. Like most mainland animals in Kaishell, they are very silent. Against the Moorkudlot, they are hardly helpless. Indeed, as strong animals with slow yet powerful arm muscles, they are quite well suited to fend off these predators. Fast strikes and even arrows are often repelled by the non-Newtonian slime protecting the Moorkudlot, yet once a Gigantomoe and Silent One are engaged, their strong yet slow rending claws are actually quite ideal weapons. In addition, their feathers offer a degree of protection against the venom-striking tongue of one of the Keepers of Silence. There are numerous attested instances of the two becoming entangled and killing one another. Despite being so capable in a brawl, they are still quiet when in the forest. After all, a fight avoided is a fight won, and beating one of the keepers doesn't mean their nearby kin won't be drawn to the sound of the fight. To keep these large herds connected in the silent forest, giant moa have patches of bare skin under their throat feathers that are stippled with tiny pores to serve as home to a peculiar parasite, magic. This wild magic will flare with bioluminescence when alarmed. The thick skin is flushed with warm blood when the feathers flex out, letting in cool air. This contrast makes the colors flash. The magic is a bright green and ultraviolet in giant gildback moa, only some of which we humans can see, but comes in many shades in other species. The servosaurs are a clade of basal ornithopod. Currently classified as elasmarians, though some studies recover them to be a clade of ornithopod endemic to Kaimere. This animal is considered a type of moa by many Clatten, though hunters will attest they are very distinct in flavor and internal anatomy, such as lacking air sacs and a very different breathing system. Their largest species in Kaishell is the netlaru. Unlike the moa, which tend to live in herds of related animals, netlaru live in large, loose herds of unrelated animals of both sexes, and are generally led in their foraging by the largest, most aggressive males. Fabidants are a lineage of tetrapod that have been evolving in Kaimere independently since the First Dynasty. Though named for their bean-shaped teeth that are fairly consistent across this clade, they have a number of strange and unique features, most famously a highly derived parietal eye. In many species, this third eye has exceptional color vision, helping them hone in on healthy vegetation, while the outer eyes are more sensitive to low light and motion. The Tra-Ba is Kaishell's largest Fabidant, with large males weighing up to 5 tons. These are mixed feeders, grazing on ferns and horsetails in the open and bark or leaves in the silent forest. This versatile diet, coupled with them being among the best chewers, does put them at a distinct competition with many Parasauropods, which often must resort to higher browsing in areas where they intersect with the Fabidants. A formidable collection of 600 teeth that are regularly replaced means that they process just about any vegetation. Osteoderms along their back, shoulders, and hips afford defense alongside their coat of hair analogs, which is quite sparse in this larger species. They consume a considerable amount of salt water while gorging on kelp prior to venturing into the silent forest in winter, and glands on either side of their anus secrete this excess salt, so that a back half of the animal not only smells of salt, they can spray it behind them in a burst. This deters the morkut lot that might detect them, but for the most part, they are slow-moving and silent foragers. The other two clades of Parasauropod are both quadrupedal. One group, the Parasauropoidea, or true Parasauropods, have been quadrupeds since the Mesozoic dynasties. This is reflected in their much more derived foot condition. True Parasauropods cannot pronate their wrists, so still have their palms facing each other, but their feet have still converged upon similar configuration to sauropods. The helmeted Tleteka is their largest member. What fossil surveys have been conducted suggest this group once approached 22 tons millions of years ago, but this animal is closer in size to Kaimere's largest proboscideans, with adults ranging from 9 to 15 tons, with males averaging slightly larger. They are still among the biggest animals in the silent forest, certainly its largest permanent residents. These are versatile feeders, with the most famous of their feeding being mossy bark of fallen trees. As highly reclusive animals, they avoid the sort of open territories that Clatten often prefer to live, so are quite rarely encountered. This has given them a rather mythical reputation among the indigenous peoples. Tleteka live in mixed-sex herds segregated by age. While parents watch over the nests, once the young hatch, they remain together and go deep into the silent forest to hide in the dense foliage along rivers and in marshlands. The young will remain in these loose congregations. They are very peaceful, non-combative animals, no doubt influenced by their evolution alongside the Moorkatlat. Males engage in simple dances to impress mates that involve a serpentine shifting of the neck to activate the purple magic they host along their throats, but they don't come to blows. The silent forest generally has a dense canopy and is surprisingly warm on the forest proper, but along rivers or other open areas of the forest it can be extremely cold. The Tleteka therefore retain a short feather insulation despite their size, which juveniles especially benefit from. Perhaps the largest parasauropod comes from a clade that more recently took to all fours and retained use of their hand claws, the ceratotrecalids. This is the Cordu. Males can reach 20 tons, though average between 12 and 15, and cows tend to be between 8 and 10. A row of paired osteoderms are fused to struts along the transverse process of the neck vertebra. These are covered by keratin. In males, these form long horns. In cows, these osteoderms instead form stout bosses which store calcium for their eggs. Cordu favor open coastal territories and are often sighted from the sea. They feed mostly on low foliage, favoring the lush coastal horsetail and fern prairies, tending to leave grass for the likes of ornithopods and recently arrived caribou. Cordu have 2 or 3 smaller related species, which have more restricted range to the west and east, but this animal ranges through the continent. The Cordu has a large head and the largest brain to body size of any sauropodomorph. This manifests in an intelligence noted by locals and researchers alike. Cows live in herds of females. These herds are fission-fusion with the whole group sometimes comprising of several hundred cows and their young, though they spend most of their time dispersed in smaller troops between 5 and 10 individuals. These troops are often comprised of the same individuals, and while usually they are related, friendships are not bound by blood, and some of the closest troop members are unrelated. These are among the most K-selected of any dinosaur. Cows will each produce a single egg, though twins will occasionally be laid. They are the largest of any amniote egg, with a volume of around 25 to 30 pounds. The size of this egg is an extreme calcium demand, hollowing out their neck horns, which is why most females are only able to lay around 1 egg each year. Incubation lasts 6 months. The shell of these eggs are so thick that the young require their mother's assistance to break free, beckoning her to do so with a pulsing song. Hatching at over 20 pounds means that these calves are not nearly as vulnerable to the small mammals and other nest raiders plaguing their relatives, and the potential threats are within a size range that their mother can directly defend them from, something many other sauropodomorphs are incapable of doing because of the sheer size disparity. Young can walk within hours of birth, but they are clumsy and entirely dependent upon their mother for food and protection for their first few months. Protecting and caring for young, coupled with the demands of egg production, means mothers often only lay 1 egg every other year, though in especially productive years they can sometimes lay each year. Mothers will partially digest food for their young only for the first few months, but they will protect the calves for their first 5 to 7 years before they approach maturity. Females often live at least within the same broad herd as their mothers, but males are driven from the herd prior to maturity. Males usually aren't solitary, but they live in much smaller herds than their female peers. These bachelor groups of 3 to 12 males are typically built around a very old patriarch. He tolerates their presence and readily teaches and protects them, but when the mating season arrives and he takes them to herds and troops, he does most of the mating. Old males that don't welcome a bachelor herd to congregate around them can be seen, but they are much less likely to be accepted as potential mates by female herds and troops. After mating, the male often takes the oldest male of the herd or troop with him, at least for a little while. These bachelor herds get too big, they can fracture, usually as the patriarch drives off the next dominant male or males, and they bring with them a new cohort. When trying to impress mates, bulls stand on their hindquarters. This is presumably a demonstration of fitness, as they are very front-heavy animals given their powerful shoulder muscles, and of course the horns adorning their neck. Sometimes males will interlock their horns, though these structures aren't terribly useful weapons, instead being a signal of health and predator deterrence. When fighting, males instead stand, pressing their chest together to shove and rake at their opponent's ribs and bellies. The skin of males is especially thick in these areas to endure this combat. Bull Cordu spend their adult lives in the coastal fern prairies. Not only are they large enough to endure the cold, their wide-set horns make maneuvering through the silent forest a bit challenging. Cows, on the other hand, retreat into the forest when the first frost passes through. While they form large herds on the prairies, cows live in much smaller troops through the winter in the forest. The forest is warm and has sufficient food. Often they must stand to browse, something the front-heavy males struggle to do. It is believed this is why this species retains their claws. Males use them in mating rituals, but most of their predator defense is their size or horns. Cows are much more likely to stand and use their claws to fight, along with their employment in feeding. Like Tleteka, Cordu cows are very quiet in the silent forest. At 8 to 10 tons, cows are large enough that they can reliably fend off a morcutlot. Their size means the venom of a keeper of silence is dissolved by the salt in their blood, so it takes a tremendous amount of damage to even slow them down. Kills have been documented on even large cows, but these were solitary animals with substantial morcutlot casualties. The reason for cows being silent is, of course, they're young. Juveniles for the first few years of life are small enough to be vulnerable to attack, so the herds are quiet. Rather than use sound to communicate, Cordu rely on keen vision, bold patterns on the head and tip of the tail, and heat-activated magic on their throat and tail to keep in silent contact. If they are discovered, which does occur despite their best efforts by sheer virtue of their size, the cows form circles around the young and endure the attacks, using their claws to pin down and slowly rip through the morcutlot, thereby circumventing the hardness of their slime, which almost solidifies under quick impact. Once they become adults, male Cordu only enter the forest in years of particular famine along the coastal prairies. The largest predator of Kaishel is the only predator large enough to pose a threat to adult Cordu. This is the Kettle. These enormous, beaked predators prefer open territory and are the undisputed apex predators of the coast. They are generally believed to be within Hippoelectriona, making them some sort of coelurosaur, though their phylogeny does vary depending on study. What is known is that they are regular predators of any parasauropod they come across. Kettle mate for life. Males and females show minimal sexual dimorphism, with males averaging slightly larger and often having bigger crests, but there's so much overlap that these aren't reliable markers. They hunt out on coastal prairies or beachcomb in the warmer months, but are often forced to retreat into the silent forest to endure the winter. They lay their eggs in the silent forest at the end of winter, having them hatch just as they go out to the abundant prairies in spring and care for their young closely in these first few months, then see them off, before mating and returning to the forest. Though they lack the teeth of their Coelophosaur predecessors, they are quite capable killers with a hooked beak and a pair of canine-like cutting protuberances. This configuration is excellent at delivering precise blows. While they prefer to hunt out in the open, where there is no fear of evoking the Morkutlot, winter cold drives many animals into the forest. Mated pairs hunt together, keeping aware of one another through their own magical parasites. Theirs grow along their sinus pad, which can flare a bright blue when warm air is pushed through and they are otherwise dormant. Even passive breathing will often see a slight glow. In the territory of the Keepers of Silence, a beak with a combined piercing and slicing function is an excellent weapon for a swift and silent dispatch. They have been attested to strike at the back of the neck of several spinal cords or bite through the throat, both means of a quick kill if they execute the maneuvers correctly. Strikes to the back of the neck are of course avoided in the likes of the Cordu. Kettle are around 4 to 7 tons as adults, with males being slightly larger, so adult male Cordu are usually too large to risk, especially in bachelor herds. Though true sauropods have failed to colonize the polar continent despite at least 2 land bridge opportunities, these relatives have absolutely thrived, being the most successful large dinosaur clade in Kaishell alongside the ornithopods. Parasauropods occupy a similar role in the ecosystem of Kaishell as their tropical cousins, and are among the greatest shapers of the continent, save, of course, the Keepers of Silence themselves. Cheers to Connor for sponsoring this episode. Around a week after I first introduced the Cordu in my first Kaishell episode, this study was published demonstrating that true sauropods were generally restricted to their temperate tolerance. Prosauropods, on the other hand, in the form of Glacialosaurus, have been found in coastal formations of Antarctica during the coldest years of the Mesozoic. Still a warmer global climate than today, and the continent was further north, but unlike the true sauropods, they lived in a habitat that would periodically dip below freezing, and probably got a lot colder inland. This offered me a much better template for what I wanted to portray in Kaishell, and thus the Parasauropods were born. We don't have any feathers preserved in sauropodomorphs, but as some basal sauropodomorphs live in places that got below freezing, they were quite closely related to other basal dinosaurs that were almost certainly feathered. I think it's a reasonable speculation, and would certainly have helped small species or young of larger animals endure seasonal chills. Kaimere is a warmer planet than Earth today, but Kaishell still gets snow and dips below freezing in the winter, so having feathers would have given these animals a much better chance at survival. I did consider making them ornithopods, perhaps related to or with an Elosmeria, but I've already gotten a lot of those in a branch of early sauropodomorphs. It's an ancestry I found much more compelling. As with the last few big episodes, I had additions to this budget. There aren't many Parasauropods I felt a need to cover, but this did afford time to unpack the Kettle art and draw some native Kaishell fauna like the big Fabidants and small predatory theropods. My great thanks to Garrick, Isabella, Luna, Sam, and Siren Lord for adding to the budget so we could see more of this elusive continent of quiet and cold. My great thanks again to Connor, to my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you for watching. Cheers, folks!